All right, so it's now time for our first official presentation of the conference. So this is a keynote address from Dr. Margi Prideaux, who is an international negotiator and academic. She's also the author of Fire, a message from the edge of climate catastrophe. Now she's joining us remotely to reduce her travel-related greenhouse gas emissions, but she's also, so we're going to have a pre-recorded talk, and then she'll also be available to take questions at the end of this. So you can either get up and take them on the microphone. If you want, use your app and feed questions into your app. So I'd now like to welcome Margi and look forward to hearing what she has to say.
I want to tell you a story. It's one I'm sure you've heard 100 times before. You've probably watched it on TV or listened to it on your morning commute. You think you know where the story's going, but I wonder if you've ever heard the final chapter. My version of this tale begins in December 2019. Australia was already on fire. Homes and lives had been lost, and my community was on high alert. There's something that ripples through a rural community during fire season, where people in the city talk of the intensity of the sun, or the welcome shade of streetscapes or trees, or the merits of the office and home air conditioning. People in the countryside see a different summer. The wind is drier, ground and leaves and twigs snap more underfoot. When scuffed or kicked, the soil lifts like cloudy dust. Eucalypts drop their leaves in a hopeful effort to cover the ground. Our environment is tinder dry and we feel it. And this knowledge passes between us in every exchange, every handshake, every hug. Silently, we're saying, it's fire season. Please take care. In December 2019, Southern Australia was very, very dry. Lightning struck in the farm next door, and within minutes, my husband was hauling his ute out ready to fight the flames. Within the hour, I was on my way to the fire station to start what would become weeks of shifts as a radio operator. We're a community of firefighters. Some of us have been so for generations. We know fire, and generally we win, but not this time. Lightning had struck again on December 30th in the island's jewel, the Flinders Chase National Park, to the southwest of our farm. Hundreds of firefighters and earth movers from our small community and beyond risked their lives to build fire breaks to halt the front, but 3 days later, on January 3rd, 2 pyrocumulus clouds exploded and sent a fast-moving firestorm north and eastward. This previously rare phenomenon incinerated farms, animals and infrastructure, lighting decades-old plantations like candles and overrunning vast ecosystems and their wildlife. The wildfire was so hot, so uncontrollable, it literally devoured the landscape at lethal speed. Firefighters took refuge where they could or fled from the front. The sheep, cows, kangaroos, wallabies, koalas ran in panicked mobs and perished together in tortured heaps. Stunned and confused, wildlife had nowhere to hide. The wildfire destroyed our farm, our home, and our dreams. It destroyed the farms, the homes, and the dreams of our neighbours too. And the wildfire took 2 lives, a father and son, both brave firefighters. By January 4th, the wildfire had reverted to just a devouring crawl, burning eastward for yet another 2 harrowing weeks. When finally contained, but still active, it had burnt more than 2,100 hectares of agricultural land, plantations and woodlands on our small island. 89 homes were reduced to ash and nearly 300 farm buildings destroyed, many with tools and equipment collected over farming generations. Close to 60,000 farm animals and 830 beehives were destroyed. 1,500 hectares of mature plantations were razed. This is the story you know. You've read the words and seen the pictures, homes in crumpled heaps, shocked homeowners looking through the rubble of their lives. But the wildfire was just the start. Surviving the recovery was so much harder. Across Australia, the figures were similarly grim. Black Summer decimated 19 million hectares of land, destroyed 3,000 houses, killed 33 people, more than 100,000 farm animals and 3 billion native animals across Australia. It burned a globally unprecedented percentage of the continental forest biome and took its place in history as one of the largest wildfire seasons anywhere in the world. Yes, let me say that to you again, and please let those words sink in. It was one of the largest wildfire seasons anywhere in the world, far eclipsing the wildfires of North America and Europe. It raged across the continent for 7 months. Smoke plumes and firestorms reached 30 kilometres above the ground, injecting aerosols into the stratosphere and circumnavigating the globe. In that fateful season, thousands of people were rendered homeless, deep in trauma and cut adrift from society while they tried to recapture and rebuild their lives. These are the chapters you do not know. It is these missing chapters I want you to hear and understand. From across the world, there was absolutely an outpouring of goodwill, care and compassion for everyone who lost in the fires. But love does not rebuild a life, and compassion does not protect the future. Cloaked with anxiety, dread and bone-deep sadness, all of us found ourselves suddenly turning to government bureaucracy that was ill-equipped to even understand what we faced. Now homeless and in tents or sheds or shipping containers, looking across a landscape rendered utterly lifeless. We waited for months for committees to form, for meetings to be scheduled. All the while, we clung to our phones for hours and hours, attempting to re-establish our existence. Without ID, you cannot reclaim ID. Without ID, you are no one. The process was slow and painful and demoralising, and it went on for months. Overnight, we'd slipped from being landholders and business owners to being nothing. And when you are nothing, you have to wait for the world to notice you again. All the while, you're looking out at the ash that was once your life. In time, insurance paid up. Honestly, the industry had little choice. It's not as if it could claim the fire was arson. But soon we discovered that insurance is not nearly enough. Keep in mind, we didn't wake in the morning after the fire filled with excitement about building our new dream home. Most of us had never even considered the prospect, and yet we faced a building industry keen for our business, but who really saw dollar signs to chase. No one stepped forward to talk about how best to rebuild, about how to prepare for the future. It was all focused on builder expediency and cost. We had to research the BAL building code on our own and to insist those standards as baseline in our contract. Keep in mind, we're deep in trauma. There was no one around to offer independent advice, no one to offer informed support. We were genuinely on our own. Jeff and I negotiated with our builder to meet some of the BAL 40 standards. Things like less than 3mm gaps in the eaves to the ground, BAL 40 rated windows with fire screens, steel and modwood decking and more. With our plumber, that we contracted separately from the builder so we could control this part of the build, Jeff designed a firefighting system into the house, the sheds and the surrounds. And then we, like everyone else, shared our information across our community. This was how our community learned. There was no external support. Most of us discovered that our new insurance offered almost no concession for our efforts and rewarded us with a threefold rise in our premiums. Are we better off than the fire? I'm often asked that. Genuinely, hell no. It's cost us dearly both financially and emotionally. Are we safer, more able to face the next fire season? That's, to me, the more honest question. And to that I say absolutely. But not only because of our wildfire-conscious and costly rebuild. And here is the final chapter that needs to be told. We already knew our community had strong glue holding us together. We already knew that farmers, the food bowl and fibre source of the world, don't function in isolation. It takes a community. Teachers, doctors, plumbers, firefighters, artists, musicians, wildlife rescuers, future leaders, friends. This is what makes the rural world turn. We treasure it, foster it, protect it, and we learn. Through the hellfire journey, our discovery that the world beyond us forgot us, our slow and debilitating rebuild path only brought us back into life because of the grace of our community. We began to talk about the future and about what we can do. Sure, there have been small government increases in firefighting resources, not nearly as much as is needed. Government has certainly protected its own assets within the parks. There have been limited government grant programs for community projects, but these are really nothing more than baubles and beads to prop up the reports, the Royal Commission, and all manner of documents created to narrate the fiction that government is fully awake to the urgent risk. Nothing material in government control has changed to make our communities safer. Mostly the world and our government has forgotten. But if you've walked the path through a firestorm with the community, then you learn we only have each other. It's together that we will survive. We will plan, we will coordinate, we will go our own way. And this is the final chapter's message for you. My community knows down at our cellular level that our wildfire will be back and yours will come soon. Science is screaming at us that climate change is ramping up the pressure and we have to adapt. My community also knows the contract with government is broken. Governments are not prepared for what is unfolding right now. We will only survive the next apocalyptic climate storm through knowledge and connection we share with our neighbours. Build it, foster it, talk about what threatens you, and please don't close your ears to this story. This final chapter of a tale you've heard so many times before, because soon your survival will become part of the same book.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, David King, for the welcome to country, and also Mark Greenhill for the welcome to this vital conference. I also want to extend my gratitude to the organising committee for embracing my virtual attendance stipulation and honouring my climate pledge not to fly anymore. My career has taken me overseas multiple times a year for decades, and I feel very keenly the responsibility of the emissions that I've contributed to. So I'm grateful to be able to bring a controversial message to you in this format. David's comments this morning have really moved me, and I'm still internalising them. Country is changing, and he's so right. We have so much to urgently work out. You are a crucial and actually a very unique gathering, and I feel very honoured to be given the opportunity to sow some seeds in your mind before you go on to deliberate all of the important details about this existential threat that we're collectively facing over the next 2 days. I think that the words that are really coming forward for me is what David said. We need safety across country, and understanding who is in country is part of that. I've actually long since given up arguing if we are facing climate change or a changing climate. That, as you can imagine, as I was writing Fire, that was something that I was confronted with on almost a daily basis as people assimilate information in different ways and come to understand what's happening in different ways. But the reality is that the world is changing, and it's changing very fast. Our conditions are getting harsher, more brutal, more dangerous, and yet our preparations for this future, with the exception of the work that you are doing, is sliding woefully behind. And when I mean we, I'm talking about the community at large, and I'm talking about all of the government agency beyond the small group, and you have to admit that you still are a small group that are focusing on the deep threat of wildfire. When I say that, I'm not actually meaning about our national and global efforts to reduce emissions, although I find that progress equally depressing as well. I'm talking about adaptation. I'm talking about adaptation and actions in the here and now in order to survive the wildfire that we're going to face tomorrow, not in 2050, not in 2090, or in some distant, terrifying world inhabited by our great-great-grandchildren. I'm talking about now, because without attention to now, there's not going to be a 2050, nor will there be any hope of reshaping that distant, terrifying future into something kinder. I feel a deep frustration, actually, that I need to express. It's a frustration that the world, and closer to home, even in Australia, so quickly forgets the scale of impact and loss within mere months after each climate-driven disaster. I'm thinking about the comment that was made earlier about the number of people in Australia that consider climate change to be impacting our lives right now. And yet we've had disaster after disaster rolling across our nation for 3 years now. You know, but I also understand it. Until January 3rd on 2020, I was probably among the forgetful too. Life gets busy and bad news wears you thin after a while, and it's easier to just let it slide, I think. There's a habit of doom scrolling that we get into, and then I think we almost overwhelm ourselves so that the news of what the reality is becomes untrue. It becomes fiction, becomes something that's happening on a screen, not something that's real. So I know it. I understand about the forgetting. I understand the willful turning your mind away. And even despite spending a career working on international conservation and climate change, I was utterly unprepared for the deep, deep soul shock of the Black Summer wildfires. It wasn't actually the loss of our home. We had been in the fire station for 2 weeks before the fire actually hit our property. Well, I had been in the fire station. My husband had been on the fire ground. And so we were in many ways disconnected from where we lived. And we had started staying in accommodation closer to the station. You know, it's a long distance when you're in a rural community to be going backwards and forwards after such long shifts. So we weren't physically actually even here on the day that our farm was lost. And the day after, we had to travel for an hour through active fire ground and burnt ground before we arrived here. So that hour of blackness and animals in heaps against fence lines and white ash everywhere had almost prepared us for seeing the house. So it wasn't actually the loss of our home or our sheds that hit me so deeply. It was standing about an hour later deep in a paddock that sits adjacent to our vineyard. I was standing there and could see from horizon to horizon white ash. It was actually above my ankles. It was so deep because the breeze was billowing it into areas, and I happened to be standing somewhere where it had collected. But it looked like a blanket of sinister snow. It was just lifeless, absolutely lifeless. There wasn't a bird, no insect hum, nothing but the breeze. And I looked up the hill to see my husband Jeff walking along the row of his vineyard that had taken the first brunt of the fire. And I watched him sort of stand and look deep into this place that he had invested so much time and love. And it was a silent howl that came from him. And in that moment, I think my soul shattered because I realized we were looking at the results of climate change, and I was not confident we were going to be able to survive it. It was never the fire. It was the result of the fire. It was the aftermath. And I didn't know if we had the strength to keep going. It took me actually 18 months to recover from that. And that 18 months had moments where we both stood very, very close to the cliff edge, deciding whether or not to keep going. Then, watching the disasters of the next few years, and by the disasters I'm talking about the heat dome in North America, epic wildfires in Latin America and Europe, the floods, lethal mudslides almost everywhere it seemed, including in Australia. Then more wildfire. Now we're seeing heat waves rolling. And in early 2020, I found myself initially confused about why there was this forgetting. It would sit in the media for a week or two, and then we would be talking about something inane. I went through a number of cycles of feeling. Initially, I was outraged, and then I became sadly resigned that the next disaster would always come to the media and politicians as a shock. And while this revelation was unfolding, I was also researching for my book, Fire. So I was interviewing community members within my own community, but also across Australia, and finding very similar reactions in so many of them. To keep in mind, when I'm interviewing people, I'm not interviewing people in their homes or in safe environments. I'm interviewing people who are still standing in the ash of their farms or beside the rubble of their home. And they were seeing the same media and were equally confused. Then out came things like the Red Cross fire preparedness kits and a host of other kind of bushfire safety tools that just seemed to fall inadequately short of what was needed. I'm not denigrating the quality of those tools. They are actually magnificent and they are crucial for human survival in the moment. But no one was prepared for what the bushfire would actually mean. It wasn't just the loss of life in the moment and saving that life. It was, how are we going to survive the recovery? I know in the background of this willful ignorance that seemed to be afoot, there are many, many good plans, good reports, good strategies, sensational research, lots of which is going to be discussed today and tomorrow by you. I don't want to denigrate that in any way. I know that there is important work going on, but on the ground where communities face the gravest risks, there is actually almost nothing. I know that's a big statement, and I know it's a controversial statement, and I know some of you in the room and some of you online are going to feel outraged that I've said it. But look closely at where the money is actually flowing. Is it going towards the creation of committees and reports? Is it supporting the salaries of people who are tasked to talk about wildfire risk and to create awareness projects? Is it going into national park and state park fire plans? Probably yes. These are all functions of government and they are very, very important. NGOs are taking up some of this work too. I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be done, but how much is actually going into physical adaptation? How much is going into road access, safeguarding buildings, firefighting equipment? Wildfire is threatening us everywhere, from the deep bush to the open farmland, yet adaptation is being treated by government as an elite option. They're forgetting that community defences need people that are willing to face grueling 20-hour shifts every day day after day, to inhale deadly smoke week after week, to face exhaustion and crippling depression, all with the hope that they'll have a livelihood when the disaster has passed. These people are typically not the elites of society. They do what they do for their communities. Their homes need to protect them so they can protect everyone else. And right now, that adaptation level is a long way from reality. Given my background, you probably thought I was going to speak about the threat of climate change to nature and wildlands. I'll admit that is actually still what gets me out of bed every morning, and it is the driving passion in my life. But in truth, I know these places need people to save them. And right now, those people are under just as much threat and suffering and loss. So protecting people means engaging with the world of economics and politics. And the economics of loss are staggering. By this, I mean the loss to the economy as each disaster sweeps through. I was looking this morning again in the Royal Commission reports that I've got set beside me, and they have sat beside me now for 2.5 years. Deloitte in 2017 estimated that natural disasters cost the Australian economy $18.2 billion per year. That's tangible and intangible costs. Some estimates have put the Black Summer fires at $88 billion for the one season. That's only property damage and economic loss. That's enormous. The numbers through Black Summer climbed obviously into the billions, but to know that it is that high is staggering. The other thing that I need to say too is, and I'm still struggling to find the right words to describe this, but the intangible of loss is still not well captured in these figures. Government infrastructure, things that the insurance industry engage with are factual and able to be captured as figures. But the loss of a person's business or the loss of their confidence to continue living somewhere and being forced into a different lifestyle, I think are things that we need to struggle our way through so that we actually can capture them as well. Because my sense is in the tail of Black Summer and then with the floods thereafter, that we're not really understanding how much our country is being hurt. Add to that the climbing insurance premiums that are pushing more and more people and businesses into risk situations, and the cost of materials for rebuilding when shortages hit. And we've certainly all experienced that over the last 2 years. But communities, especially rural communities, can't withstand it. It's actually crippling us. But I'm fearful that soon the nation isn't going to be able to withstand it either, and then we'll be in serious trouble. My sense, looking through the literature and reports, is that you in the Blue Mountains and perhaps more broadly in New South Wales might be slightly ahead of the nation. I could be wrong, and I don't really know, but nonetheless, I think it's safest if I lean on a South Australian example to illustrate what I'm talking about. Our farm is 30 kilometres due north as the crow flies of Flinders Chase National Park. We're surrounded by commercial eucalypt plantations. I have actually no idea what the BAL rating would have been required for a new house build before the wildfire hit us. But directly afterwards, our property and the surrounding farms were inexplicably rated as BAL 12.5. When I inquired about this, I was told it was because the fires had already razed so much land. But what the result was, and this is part of the intangibles, is the cut price building industry literally swooped in. They were like predators on the hunt. It was particularly galling considering everything documented in the Bushfire Commission report, and I've read it word for word, the entire thing. I can even tell you the pages, 399 to 414. Far too many of our community succumbed to their rebuild properties. It was rebuild promises, sorry. It was an opportunity lost. We had an opportunity in that moment to step beyond the legacy risk of the buildings that we already lived in, of the environment that we already lived in, and protect our community going forward. What is the cost of the fact that that didn't happen? Those of us who resisted the cut price building, knowing that we had to rebuild better, knowing that if we wanted to stay, it was sadly going to be up to us. We had to struggle against a building industry who really had no interest in going beyond the code. Our rebuild cost us at least a third more because we put Val 40 stipulation into the contract. And I can assure you, we had to fight almost every day of the build to make sure that that was happening. Do we need Val 40 to protect us from a wildfire racing across our paddock to our house? Obviously no. We're firefighters, and we know any firefighter worth their salts could defend our house with a garden hose. We stand now on a hill in the middle of a grassy paddock. But we also know when 326 square kilometres of Flinders Chase are on fire, 120 square kilometres of eucalypt plantation are exploding, and pyrofume clouds are raining embers down on us, will a BAL 12.5 house actually make it? No way. I know it, you know it. So why then did our government not stipulate a more rigorous rebuild requirement? Wouldn't it have been fairer for everyone rebuilding? Wouldn't it have been wise, given the firefighters facing the future firestorm are living in these homes? Why wasn't the legacy risk addressed? These are not unknown statistics and trends yet. For each disaster we face them anew without a plan and without a strategy. And that is what I am meaning when I say government is not prepared. It's as if we're all trapped in some kind of mental warp of blinkered thinking. We use this language that just sort of traps us. 1 in 100-year floods, 1 in 10-year fires, 1 in 50-year fires. This is dangerous language, and in so doing, we reinforce the political expediency to kick the can down the road. But let me assure you, rebuilding a life is way, way harder than surviving a wildfire. My community lost 2 people in the Black Summer wildfires, and probably we've lost a dozen since. Some of those have died, some have left our community. We still have active suicide watches, and that's 3 years on. There are telephone trees still active in our community long, long after the recovery process has left, has packed up the building and gone away. Telephone trees checking in to make sure that communities are not suiciding. And we know that we're not going to make it over the coming period. There will be more people leave us in one way or the other. The emotional, mental, and physical toll of recovery is incredibly high. Looking across a landscape almost every day, that yes, is nature rebounding, and yes, is nature that is beautiful and wondrous and magnificent and incredible, but it is still deeply, painfully burnt land. So this is why I am deeply grateful to have the chance to tell you my community's story. I've actually walked away from my career, and I'm now exclusively helped I have actually walked away from my career. I knew I would do that. Hang on a moment. I'm intentionally not standing up today because I was bone scared I would do exactly what I just did then and pull my headphones out of my ears. Okay, so let me say, I have walked away from my career to exclusively focus on helping my immediate community adapt to what we know is coming. We've held our own community meetings and we predict that within 3 years, especially with El Nino kicking in sometime, if not by the end of this year, early next year, we know that we are going to face another fire within 3 to 6 years. We now understand that we can't rely on the weather conditions of the past. We now understand that the sea breeze that was once our saviour in wildfire seasons will feed pyrocumulus clouds. We understand what pyrocumulus clouds are, and we didn't before. We're getting wiser. We're sharing information. We're putting in the infrastructure that we need to protect ourselves because there isn't anyone else to help us. I'm actually openly advocating, and I know that it's radical and I know that people will disagree with me, but that we go our own way, that we adapt to the needs that we as a community feel, regardless of what government tells us to do, because we're finding government is too slow and government doesn't understand. I'm for the most part also turning down invitations to speak to general audiences because in truth, no one seems to really want to hear. But you are a unique and important audience. You, all of those wonderful people sitting around those round tables that I can see, you are in a position to change the narrative, to lift the pace. I know, you know, Australia needs to be adapting to wildfire right now. And honestly, as we move into the next El Nino cycle, where isn't bushfire prone anymore? Our buildings should be the front line of our adaptation to wildfire. Safe buildings for everyone should be our legacy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Margi. Now, we do have a few minutes for questions. I can't see if there's anybody hopping up to grab a microphone just yet. I'm not actually sure where the microphones are. Oh, we've got one microphone in the corner if anybody in the room wants to ask a question. And also, if you want to put any questions into the app, those of you who are joining us in person or online, please do so. But in the meantime, I have questions. I always have questions. So, Margi, if I could ask, what are some of the, I guess, the practical things that you're doing both individually and as a community to prepare for this year's fire season, knowing what you now know from having survived 2019, 2020?
Well, I didn't put these in my presentation because they are very unique to our community and very unique to the laws that we have in South Australia. But much of the activities that we're doing are actually illegal. I probably shouldn't say this, but I will, because it's important that people understand. I think we're now understanding a bit more about what needs to change about our buildings. Those of us who have built to higher fire standards have been able to share information and are helping others retrofit to the extent that they can houses that have been built to lower fire standards. We're clearing bush. I'm sad to say it, and as a conservationist, 30-year career conservationist, we are clearing bush. We are moving big trees and understory further away from buildings than we are legally allowed. We're actually not in this landscape. We are not allowed to move trees far enough away from built infrastructure for what we experienced in Black Summer. The laws respond to the fires that we had 10 years ago, and they worked. They were perfect. But Black Summer showed us that it's a completely different game, and that ember attack is so very much more crucial, that we need more green ground around our buildings in order to be able to defend. We're putting in fire tracks through bush on private land, but still it's heritage listed bush, and we are putting in fire tracks that are not allowed. They haven't been cleared, we have not got permission, but we are doing it anyway. And we're doing it because we have no choice. We're doing it, we're also an island, let me say that to be clear. When disaster hits us, we are genuinely on our own for the first 24 hours. There is no way to get anyone else here to help us. It takes time to marshal more fire trucks onto boats and more firefighters into our unique island space. So we know that we have to look after that ourselves, but we are also ensuring that we have an incredibly good network of independent firefighting people as well. So people not only on trucks, but people in utes with fire equipment on the back. And we have a communications infrastructure that we've set up on our own that helps to manage all of those people. Now, this is pretty hardcore firefighting stuff, but again, I must say that we are a firefighting community, so this is what we understand and what we know we can do. I think that the other thing that we're doing, which is much more social, is that we are making sure we have conversations about safe space and where people should go. We are making sure we have conversations about how we will pick each other up after the next disaster. It's not only about the Red Cross fire kit, which again is a magnificent tool. Really, genuinely, it is a beautiful tool, but it's only about getting out at the emergency front. Our community has to fight the emergency and survive the emergency as well. So that's probably where we're putting our effort.
Thank you. We do have a comment coming online, an anonymous comment saying the FPAA, which is Fire Protection Association of Australia, need to educate and lobby DEECA. I'm not actually sure what that acronym is, but I'm pretty sure everybody else in the room does. And the CFA to place bushfire planning at the forefront with protection of human life at the centre, where all other overlays are strategically placed and addressed within its leading framework. This is the only way all can be satisfactorily addressed. Yes, for a fee, but not at the expense of life. I don't know if you wanted to comment at all on that or just...
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know what the acronym means either. I think it might be a New South Wales specific one, but I understand the sentiment of what's happening there. And I can tell you that in South Australia, even though our firefighting laws say that life is at the forefront, we have a conflict of interest in that the fire chiefs that run the incident controllers that run fires have to be government employees, and very often they come from the conservation agencies. And during our fire, one of the very contentious things that has had to be addressed here in South Australia is that there was a delay in making a decision about the fire that was raging in Flinders Chase National Park. And that delay, because of the interest of not backburning a wildlife area, is what caused the firestorm to outbreak. So there's a disconnect inside government agencies between what one law means and what another law means. And I don't mean that anyone did anything wrong. Everyone was operating to the best of their ability in the moment, but there is a lack of clarity about what protecting life actually means and what comes first. These conversations, though, should not be happening in the middle of a fire. These conversations should be happening years beforehand, and the community should understand them. And that, I think, is the other thing that is missing, is that communities are not part of fire preparedness. Communities are not part of firefighting, and communities don't understand to a large extent the existential risks they're facing, and they need to.
Thanks. Now, do we have two questions, two gentlemen standing, or are you just getting some blood flow? Okay, getting blood flow. Flappy. So I'm interested that you did bring up insurance, and just from my personal perspective, our insurance premiums in 2018 were $2,645. At the time, I thought we were overinsured. Our insurance premiums just due now are $5,582. So they've more than doubled in 5 years, and we haven't done anything different to our house. I'm interested that you did raise the issue of insurance, and I'm wondering what needs to change on that front, do you think?
I think that we're talking about a massive rethink in the way that the insurance industry works, and this requires government to step in. I don't think that it's fair to ask the insurance industry to just respond with the same framework and dynamic as they've been operating under all this time, but nor do I think it's fair that people's premiums become so high that they physically cannot upkeep them and have to make decisions about what to cut. Because I can assure you, we thought we were overinsured as well. But when it came to replacing what had been lost, and I'm not even talking about the stuff in a house, I'm talking about replacing the built infrastructure on our farm, we were so far behind the eight ball, it was crazy. And there was no way we could build the same house with the insurance money that we had. We had to reduce the square footage substantively. We had a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house before. We now have a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. That's how we made it work. We downscaled what we could afford to do in order to be able to stay. And that was fine in Black Summer, right? That was fine when the cost of building was still affordable and when there was still a great deal of goodwill and compassion for everything that everyone was going through. But imagine the future over the next 10 years with insurance premiums going up each year because more disasters are happening, and it's not just fire, it's flood and mudslides as well. Add to that, heat waves and drought. Insurance premiums are going to keep climbing and disasters are going to keep unfolding. And at some point, people are not going to be able to afford to rebuild and they will leave. And leaving means gutting rural communities. And I know that this is something that people in cities don't really understand, but you gut a rural community and you undermine your food security because farmers won't stay where there's no community around them. That's what I was trying to say in shorthand in the video. The food and fibre industry of the world needs communities around farmers. You have to maintain communities around farmers if you want food. That means government has to step in, I think, now.
We do have a question from the floor just down here. Got a microphone somewhere? Yes, this gentleman in the black shirt.
Okay, good morning. I'll stand up. I don't know where your camera is, but first of all, you're magnificent. You've lived it. You can see it. I'm in the industry of fire protection products, right? So in the 1920 fires, houses that burnt down, which there were 2,000 to 3,000 of, I think, I'm making that number up, but they were told, regardless of the level of bell that they were in, they could cap it at bell 40 to rebuild. Now, I'm in the industry of the next level flame zone, so clearly that broke my dreams. But my question is, surely that's an underdone result for people who did burn down. If and when this happens again, which it will, how do we stop decisions that are pressured clearly by insurance companies, government, for politics? How do you stop that happening again and actually get real protection?
Sadly, you have to rely on the thing that I have given up hope in. You need law. We need government to step in and make this law, and it's staggering to me that it isn't yet. It's staggering to me that it can be in here, it can be spelt out, it can be in every report that's been written since, it can be across the industry, general knowledge. Everyone knows that this is what needs to happen, and yet it's not happening. When we talk about climate change in this country, thankfully, we've moved to a point where we can, but we only talk about emissions. We don't understand that we actually have to be putting in changes now that lock in adaptation, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking exactly about what you're saying. We need laws that force the kind of change beyond the legacy risk that we had. They need to be laws that say BAL flame zone needs to be X and BAL 40 needs to be Y, and that the industry has no choice but to meet it. Without that, you've just got competition, and it will always pull things down. I don't know if I've answered your question properly or not, but that's my wish is that it didn't have to be law, but I believe that it has to be.
Got a question from Ben Folbig on the app, just asking, when you're clearing, are you replanting with fire-resistant species, which I understand can assist with ember filter when it's done correctly?
It can assist with ember filter for sure, and I think some places, some properties are employing that, but in my old house, I actually had a whole garden filled with fire-resistant plants, and that entire garden is what you were looking at in the video. Everything burnt, everything. Even my succulents and the famous agapanthus, it's all gone. Everything was ash when we turned up on the day. So many of us are just relying on physical distance. So we made some decision rules, Jeff and I, when we rebuilt, and we decided that there wasn't going to be anything higher than a metre within 20 metres around the house, and that there wouldn't be anything close to the house that was higher than grass. So where, you know, we've set a distance of, I think it's 3 metres out from the house, it's just going to be grass. And the reason for that is that we know that we can't have ember banking up in anything that might blow in. So we're actually trying to not only prevent the fire damage against the house from just a small grass fire, but we're trying to prevent having material that blows in and then becomes fuel for embers that have also blown in. But yes, some people are using fire-resistant plants, but I'm sad to burst the bubble that we actually had that belief and it got destroyed for us.
We've got another question/comment, which I think will actually be answered by one of the other presentations. It's Jennifer Johnson saying, will AS 3959 2018 need to be revised in light of higher average temperatures over summer, climate change and changing fire behaviour, which I think is kind of the question of the conference. Some of the recommendations, especially around defendable space, would be well and truly out of date by now, and I think Graham might be talking about that later on today. I don't know if you have any particular comments at all on that as well?
No, other than I completely agree that they are out of date. And I mean, I'm staggered, really, that we can have had such a disaster sweep across the country. We have had what was probably one of the best commission reports written post a wildfire, which is the Bushfire Commission, or the Royal Commission into National Natural Disaster Arrangements. I'm just looking at it. You know, there is really excellent information in there, and even in the gaps that it didn't get addressed, you can see that the information exists. So why is it not happening? Why did it not happen immediately? That's the thing that I find staggering, and that's why I'm fairly radically saying I think government has let us down. I think governments need to pick up the pace. I cannot think of something that is more urgent for this country than this right now.
Well,
The
look,
end.
the end. That seems like a fairly massive mic drop to end this session on. So thank you so much, Dr. Margi Prideaux, for joining us and for your presentation this morning.